This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Our goal with our videos is to empower you to be able to do the repairs on your own and save a whole lot of money and also get that great feeling of having fixed it by yourself. Today we have a Frigidaire GE stove, and it's electric elements, electric burners, and they're just not working. They're intermittent. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. This is the part number that we got from Amazon. And here is the part number for the larger, or for the 8-inch element, which is the larger element, and here is the one for the smaller one, the 6-inch element. And these are pretty inexpensive. You could maybe replace all 4 of them at the same time. But we have just 3 of them are kind of intermittent, and 1 is working all the time. So here's a couple things you can do. One is you can pull out the element and clean these terminals, the end pieces, with a wire brush or sandpaper, even a file. Probably a wire brush is the best way to do it. And it gets rid of a carbonization or oxidation that occurs naturally over time. You can either see it when you pull it out as rust, or maybe as black spots where there's a bit of a spark that creates a carbon deposit. And they create enough interference where the element won't heat up. Sometimes when you put something heavy on it, like a kettle of tea, it'll push the element out of position, so these things don't make good contact. So cleaning them up works really good. Also, once you get it out, if you bend the 2 terminals away from each other just slightly by maybe an 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, not very much, that can help it make better contact. So we're doing the same thing here with the back right burner. And sometimes you can reuse these same burners. You don't have to replace them. You can just clean them up. And sometimes it's better just to replace them. Kind of depends on how much oxidation you see on those terminals. If the terminals look really pitted and very rusty, it's probably better to get a new element. They're really inexpensive. Amazon has a good deal on them. So here's the front one. We pulled it out easily. And here's the little round terminals. And I'm going to take the wire brush and clean them up. I think that's my favorite way, is with a wire brush. But again, you could use sandpaper, anything abrasive that will remove that carbonization and also the rust. The other part of this is the thing these plug into, you could say the female side, the socket. Sometimes they get damaged, or they have the same problem, some pitting or oxidizing. So it's pretty easy to fix these or replace them. So I'm using a Phillips head screwdriver to remove the little screw that holds it into position. And I'm going to be lifting up the panel where all the burners are, hinging it up so I can change and put a new socket in. First I'll go outside though, and I'll turn off the 220 breaker. There'll be 2 breakers dedicated to your range. You can unplug it also if you're able to reach back there. In this case I'm just turning off the breaker. So I'm confirming that the stove has no power, and then I'm going to lift up this panel by grabbing the front of the top panel and just lifting up. And it has these really cool struts that hold it up, and they just pop out. Here's what the universal terminal looks like. You can get them really cheap at Amazon, and they're very easy to install. Comes in a little kit. So I got the kit open. I'm putting the wire and terminal into the plastic socket. It just fits right in and actually clicks into place. It's really cool. After I get that into place, what I'll do is grab these little wire nuts and undo them, the ones that were on the old socket. Sometimes you'll have to cut the wire. Sometimes they don't have terminals, but they're from the factory. They're just long wires that you can cut, and then you can strip the wire by about 1/4 inch, and that allows you to then splice in the new socket wires. You just put the wires next to each other, and then you give it a twist toward the right, like clockwise, and then while you're holding the 2 wires together, you can put the ceramic wire nut on and just keep turning it, and it'll tighten and create a really good electrical connection. does come with these shrink wrap pieces too, which is really smart. You put the shrink wrap over once you get the wire nut on, and then you just heat up the shrink wrap with a match or with a lighter using the heat underneath, and it shrinks the plastic around the wire nut and gives you a really good insulation, so there's no chance that the wire could come loose and touch the frame of the stove, which could wouldn't cause a fire, but it would cause your breaker to trip. So we're just making sure those wire nuts are on there really tight, and then we'll put the little plastic shrink wrap on, and we'll be able to put the socket back into position and then give it a test. So these stoves are actually really easy to work on. The parts are very inexpensive. Amazon's a good source to get those parts, and pretty easy to do this installation. I think the homeowner mentioned that this stove was maybe 10 years old before it started having this intermittent occurrence where the burners wouldn't always work. Sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't, and that was due to just kind of a bad connection between the socket and the terminals at the end of the burner. So I'm just using the heat of the match to shrink the shrink wrap around. Make sure the match flame doesn't touch the plastic, but it's about maybe 1/4 inch away, and the heat from that or from the lighter will shrink the plastic. So really easy to do. We got that all done. We're going to close up the top, just letting the struts release. We're going to bring the top all the way down, and then going to add this metal piece to the plastic. That's kind of what attaches the plastic socket to the top of the stove, and it just clicks right on top. The way you look at the piece of metal, it has kind of like a mouth, and that's the part that should point out towards you. And then once you have that clicked into place, you can slide it back onto the top panel, and then there's a little screw that comes with the kit, and you can put that screw down in there. It's a Phillips head screw, and that'll tighten that socket into position. And then it's just going to be a matter of putting the drip pan back into place. This will be a good time to clean the drip pan, and then putting the element back in. What I noted on this socket when I removed the element is that the element did not come out readily. It seemed like there's some kind of a bad connection in there. So when I looked at the old socket, I noticed that it was really corroded. That corrosion just occurs over time. It's just rust from water vapor that builds up on the metal. So here's the drip pan going back in. You can also buy these brand new drip pans if yours are too oxidized. And you're going to push it into the socket, and you want to just push it back in until you feel like it clicks. And then you put the element down into the drip pan, and you're all set. So we had 3 elements that weren't working. We replaced 2 of them, one small, one big, and we replaced 1 of the sockets. And now the stove will be up and running probably for another 10 years. They're pretty good. We're turning the power back on, the 2 breakers. We give it a test. So I like to test this by putting something heavy on and then turning it on. I'm going to reset the clock too. So press this button to get the clock set, and then I'll get it up to the current time. There we go. And we're just going to test these burners, make sure they're all good. So putting something heavy on is good because that does move those terminals inside their socket, and if there's anything loose, you won't get any heat. In this case though, everything heated up fine. So this has a Kenmore badge on the stove, but it's actually made by Frigidaire, or sometimes it'll show General Electric. When you buy the parts, the Frigidaire part's actually a little cheaper for the elements than the GE part. So hopefully this has been helpful to you and you get your stove going real soon. Thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe when you get a chance.